In the late summer of 1997, tucked deep in the high desert of central Wyoming, lay a settlement that barely qualified as a town. Sagebrush Divide. Population 54 on a good day, fewer in the winter. There were no traffic lights, no paved roads beyond the first 2 miles, and no real reason for anyone to stop unless they already knew it existed. The divide sat in a shallow bowl of desert mesas and sun-baked ridgelines, surrounded by miles of rust-orange rock formations and abandoned mining shafts that hadn't seen a pickaxe since the 1940s. At night, the wind pushed sand across the highway in whispering sheets, and the temperatures dumped 30 degrees in a blink. Locals called it the kind of place where God looks the other way after sundown. Just 16 miles east of town, hidden behind barbed wire and steel warning signs, sat a massive government-controlled zone known simply as the Range. No one in the divide knew what was tested there, only that strange noises carried across the desert long after midnight. Metallic thumps, long rolling booms that seemed to come from beneath the ground, and once in a while a faint hum that droned across the basin for hours, rattling tin roofs until people stuffed cotton in their ears. Most folks shrugged it off. One man never did. Elias Crowder, age 58, was one of the oldest residents still living on the outskirts of Sagebrush Divide. A former cattle rancher turned quiet recluse after his wife died in '92. Elias lived on a small patch of land bordering the desert flats. People described him as steady, predictable, a man who treated routine like religion. Every evening at exactly 6:45 p.m., his battered silver Ford pickup rolled past the diner so he could pick up coffee and a slice of lemon pie to take home. Then, on August 9th, 1997, Elias never came. At first, no one panicked. People missed a day. They got sick. They stayed home. But by the next morning, when his truck didn't appear on the main road, Sheriff Avery Hart decided to check in. The first strange sign wasn't the house. It was the air. The moment the sheriff stepped onto Elias's dirt driveway, his handheld radio fizzed into garbled static. When he tried switching channels, the static only got louder, pulsing like it had a rhythm. He scanned the horizon, expecting storm clouds. Nothing. Bright morning sun, blue sky, dead calm. He tried opening Elias's front door. Locked. Windows were latched, curtains drawn. But the strangest detail sat half a mile behind the house. Out in the flats, his truck. It was found idling in the middle of a dry wash. Driver's door thrown open. Headlights on, though it was full daylight. The engine was still warm. The keys were inside. The radio hissed in that same distorted static the sheriff had heard earlier, like something was trying to speak through it, but couldn't form words. What stopped Avery cold was the ground around the truck. The sand had been melted, actually melted, into 3 uneven rings of black glass, each one wide enough to circle the entire vehicle. The rings weren't perfect. They looked warped, pulled, stretched outward like something had lifted the sand from below and liquefied it. Elias's footprints only went one direction, straight into the center of the rings, and then they ended. No prints walking out, no signs of struggle, no tire marks besides his own. Just nothing. Deputies were called, then state investigators, then men in dark trucks with no license plates. They combed the area for hours. They scraped samples from the rings, took thermal readings, and carried equipment no one in the divide had ever seen before. Devices that clicked and whirred like Geiger counters on steroids. Their conclusion, delivered with rehearsed calm: Mr. Crowder likely became disoriented and walked off into the desert. But the locals knew the truth. People didn't walk into melted earth. And nothing on this planet melted sand into glass without leaving scorch marks. Days passed, then weeks. Then the town stopped talking about Elias altogether, because discussing the range never did anyone good. 2 years went by. His ranch was sold at auction. His home sat boarded, the windows covered in sun-bleached plywood. The melted rings faded under layers of blown sand, leaving a faint shadow only visible when the sun hit at an angle. Life in the divide returned to its usual slow, dry rhythm. Until the morning of September 3rd, 1999, at exactly 5:12 a.m., someone knocked on the front door of Elias Crowder's abandoned house. The neighbor across the road, an elderly widow named May Larrington, saw him standing on the porch as she opened her curtains. Elias looked thinner, older, dust-covered, and sunburnt like he'd been wandering the desert all night. He wore the exact same flannel shirt and canvas pants he'd had on the day he vanished. When Sheriff Avery arrived moments later, Elias was shivering, confused, and mumbling the same sentence again and again. I just stepped forward, just one step, and the light hit me. He seemed genuinely shocked when Avery told him 2 years had passed. Elias insisted he had only been gone maybe a minute. His watch still read the date of his disappearance. His boots were clean, as though he hadn't taken a single step since that day. And beneath his shirt a fresh, perfectly straight-stitched surgical incision ran across his lower abdomen. Elias stared at it in horror. I didn't have this, he whispered. I swear to God, I didn't have this. That was when Avery noticed something else. The incision was warm, still healing, like the procedure had been done only hours ago. Elias looked up at the sheriff with a hollow expression, voice shaking. Something took me. Something opened me up. And it wasn't human, the sheriff believed him. Because as the sun rose behind the hills, a deep humming began to roll across the desert, low, metallic, and vibrating through the soles of their boots. The same sound people hadn't heard since the night Elias vanished. The sound coming from inside the range. When the sheriff's cruiser finally rolled up to Harold's ranch, the sun was barely over the ridge, cutting long, gold-stained shadows across the empty property. The deputy who arrived first, Lane Mercer, had known Harold since childhood. But when he saw the man sitting quietly on the porch steps, elbows on his knees and eyes fixed on the distant field, he almost didn't recognize him. Harold looked hollowed out, like a man carved from pale wood, every bit of warmth scraped away. Lane approached, slow, calling his name once softly. Harold didn't turn. Only when Lane stepped directly into his line of sight did Harold blink, like his eyes had forgotten how to refocus. He looked up but didn't seem entirely sure who Lane was. The inside of the house was exactly how it had been left the day he disappeared. Dusty, cold, untouched. Harold insisted he hadn't been inside until that morning, and judging by the stale air and the thin sheet of sand across the floorboards, he was telling the truth. He moved like a man still learning how to inhabit his own body. His hands trembled whenever he tried to hold something. He winced whenever he twisted his torso, protective of the stitched line across his abdomen that he swore hadn't been there before the flash. Lane asked questions, gentle ones. What did he remember? Where had he been? What happened after the light? Harold repeated the answer, word for word, each time. I stepped forward. Everything went white. I opened my eyes and walked back. Nothing else. No transition, no memory. The sheriff, the county doctor, and eventually the same unmarked federal vehicles from 97 arrived before that noon. Harold grew quiet whenever they entered the room. He never met their eyes, and when they asked their questions, he responded differently, not confused, but cautious, like he was afraid of giving the wrong answer. As the afternoon dragged on, Lane noticed something odd. The federal agents weren't interested in Harold's condition. They were interested in the field. One man spent nearly an hour adjusting some handheld device, walking slow circles, marking points in the soil. Another filmed the area from shoulder-mounted rigs. They avoided stepping into the rings themselves, circling them like they were contaminated. Oh. By sundown, the government crew had sealed off the entire property again. A temporary perimeter went up. Bright orange survey flags dotted the outskirts. A generator hummed. Floodlights bathed the field in sterile white, turning the rings into glowing scars against the darkening land. Harold watched it all from his porch, shaking slightly under a thick wool blanket Lane had brought him. He didn't speak until the last vehicle drove past. They don't want me talking, he whispered. Lane asked. About what? Harold's eyes stayed on the field. I don't know, but they're afraid of something out there. Later that night, as Lane helped him inside, Harold paused at the doorway. He gripped Lane's arm tightly enough to hurt. There's something wrong with time out there, he said, voice low, terrified but steady. Not like a clock skipping, more like something folding. Like a road curling back on itself. He lifted his shirt with a trembling hand, revealing the incision again. Clean, straight, perfectly stitched. The skin around it was pale but not inflamed. No sign of infection, no bruising, no swelling. It was fresh without looking fresh. Lane stared at a loss for words. Harold whispered, "Somebody opened me. Somebody worked on me. I can feel something inside, something they took, or something they put back." Before Lane could respond, a deep metallic hum rolled across the valley, low, vibrating, echoing off the buttes like a distant engine buried underground. All the lights in the field flickered once, then steadied. Harold flinched and clutched his abdomen, teeth clenched. Lane asked if he was in pain. "No," Harold said. "Not pain, just pressure, like it's reacting." The hum faded. The house grew still. Lane helped him to bed, promising to stay on the property in case he needed anything. Harold nodded, exhausted. But before Lane stepped out, the rancher's voice drifted through the dim room, thin and shaking. "It wasn't a minute for me. It wasn't time at all. It was a place. And I think I'm not supposed to be back yet." Lane didn't sleep. Around 2:40 a.m., the field lights flickered again. At 2:42, the generators shut off entirely. And at 2:43, Lane saw a burst of blue-white light, small this time like a flicker, rising from the exact center of the middle ring. Then a second one, then a third. And behind the faint glow, something shifted in the darkness. Something tall, thin, and moving with the strange mechanical precision of a creature not used to having a body at all. The field was no longer empty. And whatever had returned with Harold wasn't human. For the next several weeks, Harold stayed mostly inside the old ranch house. The curtains always drawn, the doors always locked, even in daylight. People in Ash Hollow Ridge tried to treat him like he had truly just come home from a long trip. But every time he spoke, the whole room went quiet. Something in his voice, in the way he paused after every sentence, never felt right. And the incision across his abdomen, clean, almost clinical, kept reopening despite him insisting he wasn't touching it. The deputies checked on him twice a day. The state patrol returned once. The federal agents never came back. But strange things started happening around Harold's property. At night, neighbors reported seeing lights, thin, needle-like beams, sweeping across the grazing fields. Not like flashlights, more like vertical slivers of light moving with impossible precision, cutting through the dark as if searching for something. Sometimes the beams passed straight through Harold's house walls like they weren't there, illuminating the interior for a split second. One woman claimed she saw Harold standing perfectly still in his living room during one of those flashes, facing a corner, body rigid, arms at his sides like he was listening to instructions no one else could hear. Some nights the ranch dogs would bark themselves sick. Some nights the crickets stopped chirping altogether. And some nights a sound rolled across the valley, like metal scraping against metal, but stretched out, slow, wrong. A sound no one had ever heard before Harold came back. The sheriff sent 2 deputies to stay with Harold overnight. Both resigned within a week. Neither would say what happened, but one got so rattled he packed his truck and left the state before sunrise. On the morning of September 9th, a hunter found something unsettling on the ridge. A fresh set of deep tracks, long, strangely shaped, almost like a heavy machine had passed through, cut straight across the old mining flats. They headed directly towards Harold's property, and then stopped within 50 feet of his front porch. Whatever made them had simply vanished. That night, Harold walked into the local bar for the first time since he returned. Everyone fell silent when he sat down. He looked pale, exhausted, as if he hadn't slept in days. He ordered water. He stared into it like he was expecting to see something looking back. After a long, heavy minute, he whispered to the bartender without making eye contact. "They're watching me, from the field, even now." The bartender asked who. Harold didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his jacket and placed something on the counter. A small metallic fragment, perfectly smooth, warm to the touch. He said he'd found it on his pillow that morning. When the bartender asked who put it there, Harold finally looked up, eyes wide, glassy, terrified. They did. I think they left it inside me. He tapped the incision across his abdomen. And they want it back. Someone in the bar swore they saw a faint blue glow pulse under Harold's shirt at those words. Others said they heard a low humming outside, just for a moment, like something big had drifted over the roof before fading into the distance. Harold stood up abruptly, grabbed the fragment, and walked out without another word. Several people followed him outside. But Harold was already halfway down the street, moving faster than a man his age should ever move, walking straight toward the dark, empty highway, straight toward the boundary, and straight toward the field where he had vanished 2 years earlier. What came next wasn't witnessed directly, but the people who lived closest to the ridge would later say they saw the entire sky light up for several seconds with a blue-white flash brighter than lightning, but completely silent. The same kind of light people had seen on the night Harold disappeared in 1997. The same kind of light 3 hunters saw hovering above the buttes around midnight, before the collapsing inward like it had been folded shut. By dawn, Harold was gone again. And this time, there were footprints, his, leading straight into the center of the grazing field, right into one of the old darkened rings burned into the soil. And stopping there, mid-stride, as if he had simply stepped into nothing at all. The morning after the grid failure episode, the valley felt wrong in a way no one could name. The light was muted, like the sun was shining through smoked glass. The air carried that faint metallic tang again, the one Harold said clung to him the moment after the flash. Deputy Ruiz drove out alone, ignoring the sheriff's order to let the feds handle it now. She parked her cruiser 100 yards from Harold's field and immediately felt the same humming under her boots. Not sound, vibration. A low, steady tremor, like machinery buried far beneath the ground. The rings in the grass were darker than the day before. Not burnt, new. Perfectly symmetrical, perfectly matched. Perfectly wrong. She knelt and brushed her fingers across the surface. The dirt crumbled, not like soil, but like cooled volcanic glass. When she held her hand toward the center of the largest ring, the hairs on her arm rose straight up. No wind. Something else. She took one photo, and as the shutter clicked, her radio emitted a burst of high-pitched distortion that made her drop it. Not static. Voices layered over each other, like dozens of whispers trying to speak at the exact same moment. None of the words were English. She backed away. The air above the ring shimmered. Not enough to be seen, just enough to be sensed. A pressure, like the temperature of the world had changed only in that one circular patch. By noon, the sheriff arrived with federal agents. Same unmarked vehicles, same emotionless expressions, same refusal to answer questions. They escorted Ruiz back to her cruiser. One of them asked her, with a calmness that chilled her, if she had touched the soil. She didn't answer. He didn't ask again. They taped off the field with a new kind of barrier, thin carbon-looking posts that hummed faintly, forming an invisible dome over the rings. The townspeople watched from a distance as men in sealed suits scanned the air with instruments that clicked erratically, like a Geiger counter trying and failing to interpret what it was detecting. At the ranch house, Harold sat on his porch, hands clenched around a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking. He hadn't slept. Dark crescents sagged under his eyes. Every now and then he flinched at sounds no one else heard. Around 3 p.m., he slowly rolled up his shirt and stared at the surgical incision across his abdomen. It was changing. The stitches, what had once looked crudely done, were now sinking into the skin, dissolving into it. Not scabbing, disappearing. As if they weren't sutures at all, but something burrowing inward. Harold pressed on the area. A ripple moved under his skin, like something shifting beneath a blanket. He almost fainted. He wanted to call for help, but the sense of being watched, closely, constantly, kept him from making any noise. He couldn't shake the feeling that making too much sound would draw something closer. That night, the humming intensified. No one slept in Ash Hollow Ridge. The valley vibrated like a tuning fork. Dogs whimpered. Horses paced their stalls. Lights flickered across homes in staggered, pulsating patterns, like the power grid was breathing. A little after 2 a.m., Sheriff Camden knocked on Harold's door. Harold opened it only a crack. Camden looked pale, sweating despite the cold night. Harold asked what was wrong. Camden didn't speak at first. He swallowed hard, leaned in, and whispered. 3 more rings appeared. Not on your land, in town. Harold blinked. Where? Camden's eyes welled. Whether from fear or exhaustion, Harold couldn't tell. Behind the schoolhouse, behind the diner. And one, he hesitated. One in the cemetery. Harold went still. Camden looked at him the same way someone looks at a storm forming over the horizon. Inevitable. Unstoppable. And then Camden added, barely audible. They're not just rings anymore. There's heat, movement, like something underneath is trying to push through. Harold backed it away into the dark of his living room. Something pulsed beneath his incision. Once, twice, in perfect sync with the humming rolling across the valley. He didn't tell Camden, but he knew. It was responding. Whatever had taken him, whatever had cut him open, whatever had sent him back, it wasn't finished with Ash Hollow Ridge, or with him. And the night outside, once quiet, once familiar, once human, felt like it was tightening around the town, drawing everything inside a shrinking circle of inevitability. As the humming deepened, the boundary between the valley and whatever lay beyond it thinned. Tomorrow, something was going to break through. They kept Harold in the safe house cellar that night, but it didn't matter. Everyone in town heard it, the low rolling hum that slid across the valley like a slow aircraft engine. Except it wasn't moving. It vibrated through the ground, rattled windows, and made the wind stop dead. Livestock pressed into fences. Dogs hid under porches. Streetlights flickered in unison the way they had the night Harold first vanished. Around 2:14 a.m., all radios in Ash Hollow Ridge turned to static. The safe house security lights blinked out. The generator cut for less than a second, but long enough for Harold to leave the cot they'd strapped him to and stand upright, staring at the locked steel door as if the hum outside were calling him by name. He didn't look panicked anymore. He didn't look confused. He looked resigned. He whispered, "It's here." Before anyone could react, the temperature inside the safe house dropped instantly. Visible breath in the dark, frost crawling up the metal door. Then the bolts slid back one by one, not forced, not broken, but moving smoothly as if someone invisible were turning them by hand. The door cracked open an inch. A strip of pale, impossible light cut across the floor. Harold stepped toward it. Miller, the deputy watching him, lunged to grab Harold's arm. The second his hand touched Harold's shirt, Miller was thrown backwards, slammed into the wall with enough force to crack the plaster. Static fizzed around Harold like a curtain. His outlines shimmered, like heat waves rising off asphalt, but colder, sharper, almost surgical. He didn't speak. He didn't fight. He didn't even blink. He just walked into the light. Federal agents who had been monitoring the safe house burst in seconds later, weapons raised, shouting commands. But they stopped dead the moment the light reached their boots. Not one of them crossed it. Because just beyond that doorframe, outside in the open desert night, something waited. A shape, not solid, not liquid, not fog, standing where Harold's shadow should have been. It shifted like a reflection on rippled water, tall and thin, with angles the human eye wasn't built to interpret. It didn't touch the ground. It didn't cast light. But the hum came from it, or through it, vibrating out across the entire ridge. Harold stepped toward the figure, and the light folded around him like a closing iris. Someone yelled his name. Someone else fired a shot, one sharp crack swallowed instantly by the hum. The bullet never hit anything. It simply winked out of existence. Harold paused for the briefest moment and looked back into the safe house. For the first time since he'd returned, his eyes were clear. No confusion, no panic. Just a tired, distant sadness. Then he mouthed something no one could hear. The figure beside him shifted. The light snapped shut. The hum stopped. Silence fell so complete it felt like it had weight. When they opened the door fully and stepped outside, the desert was empty. No tracks, no light, no disturbance in the sand. Just the faint smell of ozone and the lingering warmth radiating from three dark, familiar rings burned into the dust, perfectly matching the ones found the night Harold first disappeared. By sunrise, federal convoys had sealed off the entire western ridge. They evacuated half the town under the cover story of chemical contamination. Highway 20 was rerouted for almost a month. News stations were given a scripted explanation. The official record says Harold Whitaker died of exposure in 1997. His body never recovered. But Ash Hollow Ridge knows better. Because 3 nights after the incident, the humming returned. Soft at first, barely noticeable. Just enough to shake glassware and old kitchen cabinets. And at the edge of Harold's empty porch, where the boards still show the outline of his boots, the soil has begun to darken again, forming the start of another ring. Not burned this time. Growing, waiting. Whatever took Harold once, whatever brought him back, whatever reclaimed him, it wasn't done with Ash Hollow Ridge. And the ridge still isn't done with him either.